still kinda sick. Apologies for my congestion. Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today, I'm talking about the new collaborative album between Deadmau5 and Kaskade as Kx5. It's self-titled, it's Kx5. Man, it's been a long time since I've done any Deadmau5 related content, hasn't it? I don't think I've done a dedicated video on him since I got that microphone, and that was in 2019. And I know my coverage of the one and only Joel Zimmerman was a starting point for tons of people to first get into my channel. He was the second discography review I ever did by sheer popular demand. I talked about him a lot in the very early days of this channel and always got tons of views doing so. But he's barely released anything substantial enough for me to make a video on him in several years. There were the Mouseville EPs, I suppose, but at the time I found them to feel like too much of a lazy contractual obligation to want to give them the time of day. Despite a handful of tracks I still really enjoy and come back to every now and then, like Monophobia, GG, or Drama Free. Nothing off the third volume, though. That one kinda sucked. There was the Polar soundtrack, but I really only cared about that one enough to do like a 10-second Here Lies Music parody to cover it. There's been a couple of scattered singles that I really liked, such as Bridged by a Light Wave, Polaris, and Hyperlandia, and a couple that I thought were really uninteresting, like Saturn and Coasted and all those. And you know what? In that time that I have not been covering him, I haven't really missed him. Even if it's obviously not like his core fan base went anywhere, and I know lots of people would like to say otherwise, I feel like the days of Deadmau5 being the biggest and most unignorable deal in all of electronic music are officially behind us now, and like he's a product of a different time that is now gone by. And anytime I see his name come up, the first thing I always reflexively think about is the days of all his stupid Twitter beefs and all the various controversies he got himself wrapped up in, and I subsequently get a headache. Even if you ignore the more egregious controversies, like his uses of slurs, or some homophobic tendencies, which he tried to blame on mental illness. Not an excuse, man. But even in his heyday, I always hated his 2000s gamer, I'm better than you because I don't give a fuck about anything attitude, and outdatedly edgy South Park sense of humor. And even if he's been smart enough to stay away from the social media antics in the latter half of the decade, he later replaced most of that with doing, like, a lot of NFT projects and related stuff, which finally resulted in me unfollowing him on Twitter myself a few years ago. I have no investment in Joel Zimmerman as a person. He always kind of seemed like a dick to me, someone I wouldn't really want to meet in person. And I still kind of got that vibe off of him when I saw him live right before the pandemic hit. Before the concert started, he was, like, flashing various Q&A answers across his big cube visual thing. And while I don't remember what specifically any of the questions or answers were, I do distinctly remember seeing them and thinking I had just been sent back to 2014 or something, and thinking, man, you're still like this, huh? Though, I also can't deny, when the actual concert started, I remember having a lot of fun revisiting all the old classic material, and I do still occasionally come back to his actual music every now and then to double check whether he was really worth all that trouble to put up with. And anytime I do, I'm like, god damn it, the old music still holds up. I still really like this. Thinking about the person gives me a headache, but when I'm actually listening to his music, that doesn't come to mind anymore. The music itself is so straightforwardly likable for me that it makes it almost too easy to forget about the baggage that I might have with him, and just let the grooves and melodies speak for themselves. He may have had an ego on him, but we let it slide because we knew he had the talent to back himself up, and no one did that particular style of minimal progressive house better than he did. Even if God knows tons of people tried. Maybe some albums like Random Album Title haven't aged the best, production-wise. That one did shrink on me a bit last time I put it on, since it sounds kinda dated and stock FL Studio to me now, even though the melodies and overall cohesion are still on point. And while he absolutely always had the capability to put together full albums of quality, he tended to not even want to put forward the effort to actually try and prefer to throw together a bunch of random singles with little rhyme or reason to their sequencing just to shut people up. Why did people think that was cool again? But he has way too many fantastic standalone tracks. And albums like Album Title Goes Here and, while one is less than two, are still just as good now as they were a decade ago. And Album Title Goes Here, I think, actually grew on me a fair bit more in retrospect. I think I would mark that one as properly great if I were to cover it now. Even an album like 4 times 4 equals 12 might have grown on me too, just because it's one of his better produced albums. Hell, I even put together a continuous mix of my favorite of his loose tracks and demos and whatnot for my own personal use, and have updated it a number of times to add more over the years, to the point where it's now 2.5 hours. It looks like that right now, by the way. He just has that much quality material to his name. I may not miss his overbearing presence on the electronic music scene of the early 2010s, and I'm certainly not going to argue with anyone who says they hate him or they think he's grossly overrated. He definitely kind of is a little overrated. But I would be lying if I said I was too good for his music even in 2023, or have 100% moved on from him as much as I'd want to. And all of that is completely ignoring Kaskade, who I haven't covered in a dedicated video in an even longer time, not since the very beginning of this channel's life in 2015. And okay, that guy I have kind of missed, and my feelings on him aren't even close to as complicated. I don't remember his catalog being nearly as consistent as Deadmau5's. He does have his share of mediocre tracks and/or projects, a bit more of a tendency towards trend chasing and commercial pop, and he was obviously never even close to as unignorably influential or overexposed. But the high points of his catalog were roughly equally as high, and he's got some properly great albums like It's You, It's Me, and Atmosphere that still hold up to me. Yeah, I got 2 CDs of him and only 1 in Deadmau5. Maybe someday in the future I'll do like a discography review on him for the sake of the old memories. He did have a lot of really good stuff back in the day that I have good memories with. But the obvious reason I haven't covered him in so long is because he hasn't released a regular studio album since Automatic in 2015. He did have a Christmas album of all things in 2017, and he did have an album-length Redux EP in 2019 that I probably could have covered when that was new, but I just let it pass me by. Maybe there was also like some living room compilation in 2020 that I honestly only just found out existed. But that's the closest we've come. I'll admit that I haven't really been following either Deadmau5 or Kaskade super closely these days, and haven't been paying that much attention to what they've been up to. I hadn't been listening to any of the singles they were dropping together, but I had heard a number of announcements they made that they were going to be making an entire album together. And while I was skeptical such a thing would exist until they actually made good on their promise and it just dropped a few days ago, I figured I probably ought to be covering that. Neither of these artists are exactly in their prime anymore, but the tracks they did put out together back in ye olden days, like I Remember and Move For Me, are kind of progressive house classics. Beneath With Me with Skylar Grey was pretty good too. So a whole album of them working together was at least mildly intriguing, and given how long it's been since I've talked about either of these artists, I couldn't very well skip this over, even if the album turns out to be crap. And hey, the album did not turn out to be crap. It turned out to be fine. It turned out to be perfectly decent and inoffensive. Absolutely nothing embarrassing that'll ruin whatever already formed perceptions you have of them or turn them away from their well-established fan bases. And also nothing that comes close to either artist's best work or anything that I really see leaving any kind of lasting longer-term impact. It is a perfectly okay, if almost entirely inessential album. It's also an album that I barely have anything to actually say about, an album that combines the exact styles that you think of when you think about these artists in passing, in the most predictable way possible. The very standard but well-polished progressive house formulas you know from Deadmau5, and the usual poppy and generic indie vocalists going over EDM arrangements that you know out of later period Kaskade. If you've heard tracks of his like Something Something from Atmosphere, then you've heard the formula underpinning the majority of this album as well. If you want something that takes any kind of greater risk, you sure as hell ain't gonna get anything like that, but there's also nothing awful here either. It's just fine. So, what is worth hearing on here? Well, I will say I did quite enjoy the lead single, Escape, with Hala. While the progression from pianos into the standard progressive house beats and melodies that Deadmau5 is known for is not exactly special in the grander scheme of his catalog, and there's plenty of other tracks he's released that sound just like it, the tune itself is really solid, and Hala does give a good, solidly emotional performance, and that's all able to carry the track. It was consistently my favorite track on this album. and I'm not sure how good of a sign that is. Other tracks I pretty consistently liked include the opener, Alive with the Moth and the Flame. Definitely has among the catchiest tunes here. The vocals are fine. The drop, while a bit basic, feels like it fits well enough with the rest of the track. It's cool. Also thought Take Me High was cool, even if I initially found the pitched up soul vocal sample driving that one to be a bit annoying at first. I eventually warmed up to it and got into how energetic it was. I guess I could get behind Avalanche with James French. That was nice too. While the drops of the acid synths could be a bit on the underwhelming side, I did once again think the tune behind this one was one of the better ones. And there are other tracks I thought were cool, like Bright Lights with Arco. It's one of those tracks that had the potential to be really annoying with those chorus vocals delivering the hook, but it didn't get on my nerves nearly as much as it could have, and again, it's mildly catchy. And the closer, Unobsidian, is alright. The melodies on that one are not really that strong or memorable, and it takes some pretty standard progressive house build-up drop formulas and plays them straight. It sounds like it's retreading the ideas behind older, better Deadmau5 tracks like Suckfest 9001 and FML. But I suppose it's serviceable enough anyway, and it's the only true instrumental cut in the bunch. The rest of the cuts here aren't all that far away from any of these cuts quality-wise, but I don't really feel strongly about one way or the other. Sacrifice with Sophie Tucker probably has the single cheesiest tune out of any track here that I found kind of annoying, although the techno drop does go pretty hard. Powder Blue with Brother is definitely the most plain cut in the bunch, with no big build-up or drop, just very straightforwardly gives you the tune without doing anything with it. Though, again, the tune is still fine, it's still all fairly pleasant. It reminds me of a number of old Kaskade deep cuts. When I Talk with Elderbrook is similarly pretty nondescript, but the trancier drop of that one was decently satisfying. And I guess the lowest point might be Eat Sleep with Richard Walters, which has an entirely forgettable build-up and a drop that sounds like if you took Odessa's The Last Goodbye and removed all the melody from it. But even that track isn't like the worst thing I've ever heard from either of these artists. None of it annoyed me. And that's kind of the thing. I don't feel like there's a major distance between the best and the worst material on this project. The best moments are cool, and the worst moments are eh. And nothing here generates any kind of deeper enthusiasm out of me. And that kind of makes it a bit of a difficult one to recommend. On one hand, there aren't any outright bad tracks here, and I've heard both artists put out material worse than this in the past. Nothing here's on the level of obnoxious as a 2448, a One Trick Pony, an Us, a Mercy, a Fire in Your New Shoes. I don't care what anyone says, I always fucking hated that track. All this stuff is perfectly pleasant to have on, and the core tunes and melodies are all decently well constructed for what they are. There weren't even any tracks here that had me reaching for the skip button, because that would imply they stuck out to me enough for me to do that. But like I said before, nothing here stands among the best work that either of these artists accomplished. I wasn't expecting anything of like I Remember quality because that was 15 years ago, but I still came out of this feeling pretty ambivalent on all of it. And it's all pretty subservient to material they've already done better on their own in the past. Escape is a good track, Alive and Take Me High are cool, everything else is fine, but none of it did anything to relieve my feelings that these guys might be kind of out of their prime at this point. And if you skipped it, I don't think you'd exactly be missing anything essential, unfortunately. Which leaves me feeling, at my most generous, like a solid 6 out of 10 on this one. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. Shout out to my Patreon supporters, they're awesome people. You want to add yourself to that list, link to my Patreon is in the description. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.